Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started then. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our side event at COP29, From Policy to Practice, How Faith Actors Can Promote Locally Led Adaptation. We're so excited that you're joining us here, both in person and online, for this event that is co-organized by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Buddhist Foundation, the Episcopal Church, Maryknoll Sisters of St. Dominic, Interfaith Power and Light, Religions for Peace, and Catholic Relief Services. It's such a beautiful collection of people and organizations that really believe in the power of responding to the needs of our communities and ensuring that we have strong adaptation processes. So we're here to share expertise and really be in community and conversation with you all. We have such a lovely panel, and we also have this beautiful keynote. So before I go ahead with our keynote, I'd like to first introduce our panel. So to my far left, we have Anjali Gulati, who's a Green Dharma organizer with Interfaith Power and Light. To Anjali's right, we have Radu Ravunjia Rivello. Oh, I butchered that. It was better when I practiced it. Who's the chief of party with Catholic Relief Services in Madagascar. And then online and joining us through recording, we'll actually have Priestess Beatrice Schultes, who's the president of the Indigenous Peoples Ancestral Spiritual Council and an honorary president with Religions for Peace. To my right, I have Stephanie Stevens, who's the national project coordinator of the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency Project in Vanuatu. And to her right, we have Alex Mishko, who's the senior advisor for the U.S. State Department's Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change. So I've said a lot of words, and it's a lot of lovely people. And I think in this room sits so much expertise, and we're so excited to share with you all. But before we go into our panel discussion, we wanted to first hold space for a lovely keynote, which will be delivered by Mohammed Bar on behalf of His Excellency Judge Mohammed Abdel Salam, who's the Secretary General of Muslim Council of Elders and the co-president of Religions for Peace. Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Steve. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a privilege and a profound responsibility to address you today on behalf of the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Elders. And we gather here at a critical juncture and in humanity's shared struggle against climate crisis, a moment that calls for a collective resolve and transformation action. The theme of this session is from policy to practice, how faith actors can promote locally led adaptation, goes to the heart of what faith communities do best, transforming ideals into action, guided by deep values, morals, and unwavering compassion, is what the faith community do best. Faith has always been a powerful force for justice, compassion, and care for the earth. I think this divine mandate compels us to confront the injustice of the climate crisis, which continues to devastate the most vulnerable among us, the poor, the marginalized, and the voiceless. But how do we, as a faith actors, transform these spiritual convictions into concrete, locally led climate adaptation? And how to bringing the policy and local action. So I think faith leaders and faith-based organizations they have a unique position, serving as a moral guide and trusted institutions deeply rooted in their communities. And this embeddedness enables us to, first, to empower local communities. Faith-based networks reach the farthest and most underdeserved population. By leveraging these networks, we can equip communities with, first, hope. When scientists address the public, their focus on data, projections, and the stark realities of the climate crisis, while essential, can sometimes evoke anxiety and confusion. Faith leaders, however, offer a different narrative. a narrative grounded in hope, resilience, and the belief in humanity's ability to act collectively for a greater good. This balance of scientific truth and faith-driven optimism is vital in inspiring both understanding and action. And also faith-based communities as first responders, they can equip communities with resources, knowledge, and agency to adapt to a changing climate. So second is the champion indigenous wisdom and local solutions. The communities we serve hold invaluable traditional knowledge. Faith leaders can amplify these local voices, ensuring that adaptation strategies are co-created with those on the front lines of climate change. Third is the foster spirit of solidarity. Faith transcends borders, inspiring global solidarity and local initiatives. This collective energy ensures resources flow to where they are needed most and mobilizes the moral imperative to act. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the transformation we had in COP and the role of the Faith Pavilion, an initiative that became a cornerstone for many of the faith-based organizations at COPs. Since its inception, the Faith Pavilion has brought together faith leaders, scientists, and policy makers in unprecedented ways. Here we have demonstrated that faith and science are not at odds, but complementary. In our sessions, faith leaders have stood on the frontiers of climate discourse, bringing the wisdom of tradition with the precision of science. Together, we have not only elevated the wisdom of tradition with the precision of science, together we have not only elevated the role of faith in climate action, but also inspired innovative solutions grounded in ethical responsibility. The Faith Pavilion actually is a testament of what is possible when moral convictions meet intellectual rigor, when diverse perspectives converge to build a resilient and just future. Distinguished guests, to move from policy to practice, we must embrace a spirit of collaboration. Government, multilateral organizations, and NGOs bring the frameworks and policies. Faith actors bring the grassroots reach and moral compass. Together, we can forge an alliance that empowers communities to lead adaptation efforts with dignity and agency. Let us envision a future where communities thrive in harmony with the environment, faith and science work hand in hand, and our actions reflect our created intent. Thank you, and I wish may God guide us in the noble endeavor and bless our efforts to protect the earth for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. So as we are gathered here in COP29 in Azerbaijan, this is the place for us to transform ideals and convictions into action and locally led adaptation. So I'm so excited for this keynote and to now open our panel discussion as we really reflect on the state of where we are. And so we're so happy that Alex is joining us to kind of share with us, starting from you, share with us about your work. What are some of the barriers that you're seeing in our ability to really implement this adaptation and help us take stock of where we are right now?
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me. You may notice someone on the PowerPoint named Paula, so I just wanted to shout her out. She was originally supposed to do this panel. She's one of our preeminent kind of adaptation experts on the team, and she's currently negotiating. And so she has asked me to fill in, and I'm more than happy to, and very honored to be here today with such incredible practitioners and people who work in this field. I know negotiations are on a lot of people's minds, so maybe I'll just start by talking a little bit about what I work on, what our team works on, and then kind of how, in response to your question, I'll try to be brief, kind of things are going both in and outside the negotiations realm. So very briefly, so I work in the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. It's an international climate office in the State Department. I work on adaptation, resilience, loss, and damage issues, as well as specific cross-cutting issues like climate migration, climate and health, climate oceans, climate and gender issues. So a lot of things that are precisely relevant to this exact conversation. And maybe I'll start with some of the lessons learned in doing this work actually outside of the negotiations, and then happy to just touch briefly on those since those are a topic of interest. You know, our office, our team does a lot of work with folks around the world, and whether that's inside the negotiations, whether it's programming, whether it's assistance, whether it's thinking about new policies, across kind of the adaptation resilience space. I think locally led adaptation is at the heart of that. I think a lot of folks are familiar with PREPARE, which is the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. It's kind of the umbrella, whole of government effort that we've been making on this topic to work with vulnerable communities kind of around the world in implementing adaptation solutions. And I think the people on this panel can speak to, you know, specific challenges far better than I ever could, but I'll just note that, you know, as we implement this work across federal agencies for the US that are doing this, whether it's science and data and getting, you know, good analysis, good data out there, whether it's our USAID that's helping, you know, with project implementation on the ground. I think at the heart of all of this is supporting the communities that are actually doing the work. And we absolutely recognize that adaptation is fundamentally a local effort. And so as we undertake that work, a lot of the conversation has been around how can we make sure that we are centering that and actually listening to the voices of the people that are honestly on this panel when it comes to how are we kind of implementing those solutions. I'm happy to get into details on any of that as we go on throughout the panel. But I'll just make a quick note about the negotiations. You know, I know we're all here, and at these COPs, there's always kind of two tracks of work that are happening. On the negotiation side, I just would love to kind of note that things are going well. You know, I'm getting direct WhatsApp messages from Pallavi, who's telling me that, you know, on the global goal on adaptation, which is, I think, something that's on a lot of people's minds in this space, text is going to be forwarded to the negotiations next week. There's a lot of substance that still needs to be discussed, but there's a lot of encouragement by the engagement of folks in the room. And I think that's just one adaptation item. There's many others that are very important. There's loss and damage items. And I think across all of those, you know, at the center of that conversation for us is always how are we making sure that the work that we do is in service of the most vulnerable and making sure that we're listening to the needs and responding both in and outside. So it's pretty high level, but I'll just stop there and kind of happy to come back to any of that. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks, Alex. I think as we look to adapt in that local context, ensuring that we center local voices, I think really is at the heart of what we're doing. And so I'll pass it over to Stephanie to continue to help us think through from the Vanuatu perspective, really where are some of these barriers and taking stock of where we're at.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity for me to share some insights of and perspective of Vanuatu. So English is my third language. Sorry if I speak and you don't understand, please just raise your hand and ask question. So I'm Stephanie Stevens, working for the CBIT project, but also giving support and voluntarily support to Vanuatu Climate Action Network, and also advising on climate change, a youth-led community-based organization called Learn to Serve Vanuatu. So with my work, not talking about the NGO work, but youth-led organization and also the VCAN work, we help the community to write for grants, submit proposal so that they can have some funds to do some adaptation, innovative projects in their own communities. Supporting Learn to Serve Vanuatu. Learn to Serve Vanuatu is a youth-led community-based organization that started in 2017, and with the goal to contribute to the betterment and well-being of the communities and the society. Currently, the Vanuatu government has developed the second edition of the CCDRR, our CCDRR policy, climate change and disaster risk reduction policy. And in this paper, in this document, we have some good adaptation activity, but it's hard to translate it into local action. So some of the work that we are doing with the Learn to Serve Vanuatu is to actually help and support the youth to carry out some of these and implementing some of the policies of the Vanuatu government. So to contribute to some of the adaptation activity listed in our CCDRR policy, the youth, Learn to Serve Vanuatu youth has set up some agroforestry nurseries and help to provide endemic and endemic species of trees and also resilient crop that can support the community after a disaster or even during peaceful time. And I can just go straight to some of the barriers of the implementation. We have capacity barrier, where some of our communities, most of our communities have implementing some of the activities in the policies, but are not fully aware of the impacts of climate change. And also we can see that understanding this policy is also a barrier that they cannot understand. That's why they cannot implement. And another major barrier is the disconnection from the national level to the community level, where the learning, every time, as we see that we go to the community and say, hey, look, we have this kind of strategy, kind of approach that you can, but instead of us going and doing that, we can go and listen to them, learn from them, because they have their own adaptive ways and that are rooted in culture or faith, and that we can learn from them and then take it into consideration. So these are some barriers that I can share with you. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stephanie. I think that question of, are we willing to listen to the communities for the gems that they may already naturally have to adapt to these situations instead of coming in from that like top-down power dynamic, really is something that we don't just see in one country, but it's endemic, right? And so how we transform that, I think, is a part of the solution of how we get closer to truly locally led adaptation. So I'm now going to pass it over to Radu to continue this conversation with us.
Thank you very much. And I'll probably start with that. So we have to put the people in the center of all our discussion in terms of adaptation. When CRS set up a team of climate in Madagascar back in 2021, the first thing that we wanted to do is actually to analyze what they know already, but what are the lack of capacity as well. And I do believe that those aspects are sometimes missed by organization, because we are coming with science, we are coming with our knowledge without asking the community what are their needs. And so when doing the broad analysis on adaptation capacity, we have identified 7 barriers. I will not go over the 7, but I'll be happy to share the report. But basically, the first one, and we are in Madagascar, so it's extremely poor country, it's economic barriers. One of the things that one of the lady that we interviewed told us is, we know that there are improved seeds, but we don't have access to it. It's expensive. How do you expect us to adopt such technology? And that's really important, because we are trying to promote some techniques in developing countries without providing them the resource to do that, and without providing them income generating activities that would help them to actually adopt those techniques. The second, and it's realigned with this discussion, is the policy that we have and the weak local governance that can enforce laws and regulation. Most of the time, they don't even know that there are rules and regulation, because they are far from the capital, far from the politician, except during election. And because of lack of knowledge of the policy and rules and regulation, the local government even have poor integration of climate adaptation plan across and all levels of government, and that's really important. And my colleague was raising of the issue is in relation to the social and cultural barriers. We are working in remote areas where there are marginalized groups, such as women and very poor women. And often that's a great barrier because they don't have access to resource, but more importantly, they don't have access to any decision making. And one of the adaptation approach that we are promoting in Madagascar is ensuring that the most marginalized one have their voice as well. And so we put in place local groups at community level that raise their voice, ensuring that anything that they raise, it's transmitted to local government, but also national government. And we're really working towards advocating for their voice to be heard. And adaptation is adoption of new techniques, of new approach, but there's some cultural resistance. And the funny story when we did the assessment was that one of the men that was among the focus group was really mad at one of my colleague, a female colleague, because she was wearing a male clothes. And the first thing is, we don't have rain because you're dressed like this. These are cultural beliefs and cultural resistance to change. And just because one of my colleagues was dressed like a man, it created already a resistance. So some of our approach of promoting adaptation to climate change was really changing those perception, especially for men, old men in those areas. And that's important. When we work, we have to understand what are those cultural resistance. And finally, this is my last word, Madagascar is a hotspot for biodiversity. You know that. You have monkeys, and in Azerbaijan, what people, when they heard I'm from Madagascar, the first thing they told me is, I like it, move it, move it. Which is a little bit weird, though the hotspot we have in Madagascar, we are losing them. And the environmental degradation is enhancing the intensity and of impact of climate change, and adaptation to climate change needs as well to take into account that the environment needs to be protected. It's not just talking about climate, it's as well talking about the environment. And this platform help us as well to advocate for more funding, but as well for more work. And faith-based organizations like CRS, we have care for creation as approach to enhance protection of environment, conservation of the biodiversity we have. And what we're doing is trying to help the community as well as a faith-based organization, relying on religious leaders to overcome those barriers, enhancing as well their capacity to adapt to climate change.
Thanks, Radu. I think it's so interesting you were able not only to just showcase some of the barriers that exist in how we are failing to put people at the center of this conversation, but also some of the ways in which we can kind of move that envelope closer to equity, closer to people-centeredness. And so I'm excited to see how this conversation continues on. So I'll now pass it over to Anjali to continue to reflect with us as we think about what some of these barriers to really creating locally led adaptation look like.
Thank you, Steve. I organize Green Dharma with Interfaith Power and Light, which is a nonprofit based in the US, a network of affiliates. I work with DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia in all congregations of all faith traditions to respond to climate change through greening, education, and advocacy. Greening projects that we focus on are really about building electrification and then education about the harms of burning fossil fuels, and advocating for stronger local climate legislation that is framed with a moral perspective on how everyone can relate with being stewards of our shared home. I think the barriers that I've experienced most with locally led adaptation stem from the fact that people are, very diverse in that region, coming from really different backgrounds, especially the South Asian diaspora is maybe based in the DMV, but rooted thousands of miles away. And I think remembering some of the spiritual wisdom from Hindu, Jain, Sikh roots is not always so seamlessly transferred over. I'm someone that was born in the US, and majority of people that I organize with are either first generation like my parents or second generation like myself. Now
actually, the Indian American population in the United States is the second largest migrant population by country, and also the wealthiest on average, but with the most socioeconomic disparity within. The barriers include ignoring that by some, not really wanting to talk about the need to include people, human beings at every class level, at every background level into the same fight against climate change, understanding that the solutions that wealthier nations are adopting for some, they are not more deserving or more entitled to concentrate those resources for adaptation. And I think another thing is like the structural organizing with Hindu and Jain communities, especially over the last year. It's been a busy year in the diaspora. Politically, a lot of polarization. The challenges that have come since COVID, since people have been, congregating less in person. I mean, now more so back, but just vast disagreement. Luckily, temples and gurdwaras definitely serve as community hubs for people to gather and speak the same language and eat the same food and carry out the same traditions that they did growing up, and realizing more sustainable ways to do that. But then also it's important to acknowledge that, Hinduism was never a monolith, and it never will be. It will never be practiced the same way across all communities, and different geographies that people are rooted in their ancestry. It's important to acknowledge that independent wisdom as we come together in the region that I serve, especially as people come to the US, and, American culture is notorious for individualism, consumerism, which we can actually educate communities on how spiritually they are not, we're not meant to, uphold capitalism and the concentration of resources in finding the adaptation. I think, especially with the diaspora being connected politically overseas, paying attention to religion-based violence and discrimination, preserving the freedom of speech and the freedom to share information, is increasingly threatened by the rise of fascism. And the youth, my generation growing up in an age where everything we say and do online is kind of fossilized forever, is intimidating. It's not the same case. Like information sharing on one hand has been so vital for the movement in faiths working together to fight climate change. And on the other hand, our souls have not evolved. We haven't quite adapted to handle the heavy load of information that we receive constantly from the news, from social media, the images of violence and destruction of the planet, of each other. We aren't meant to bear that burden alone. So, the spiritual communities working together with each other and among each other to combat climate change has been a healthier source of spiritual grieving and commiseration for the sake of staying united and making sure that, doom and gloom is not overtaking us totally.
Beautiful. Thank you for those reflections, Anjali. I thought it so interesting as we close out our in-person panel reflections on this question that you lift up this narrative of how it can become very difficult when you begin to do the adaptation work, when you come into the local context, the complexities that come from the localization of it, right? The interpersonal dynamics, the wealth disparities, classisms, like our perception of like individualism and collectivism, all these dynamics are at play. Right. And our question of like, are we willing to face these complexities to really care for the local community, or do we choose to ignore communities for the sake of ease, is something that I think has been teased out in your reflections. And as we close this part, I'm thinking really, who are we building this future for? And are we ensuring that everyone is included as we continue to work to adapt to our changing climate, right? And I think that lies at the heart of what we're looking to do here. So now I'm super excited to pass over our question to Priestess Beatrice Schustes, who's the president of the Indigenous Peoples Ancestral Spiritual Council, who has so graciously recorded some video remarks reflecting with us specifically on this question of barriers and to implementation on adaptation. And she also continues to follow up with the reflection to our second part of our panel, which is really what is the role of faith communities in implementing this adaptation, and then what value add do we really have to bring to this issue. So we'll pass it over to her to take us away.
Yeah. Okay. My work is in reality is more general at community level. I live in a community at the coastal area of Costa Rica on the Atlantic coast, Caribbean coast. So in our case, in order to adapt to climate change, there is no national institutional plan. The implementation of adaptation is mostly done at the community level. There is no special funding for it as well. So we don't get directions like you have to do like this. I saw in various documents that they talk about direction, how to do this, how to do that. That is not our case. So we made not so long ago, actually, we did review a plan, for example, in which direction we have to evacuate in order to escape when the water rises from the different locations in the community. So we have sort of a map which we made, and from the different corners of the community, we have designed in order to make everyone know which way they have to communicate, evacuate in order to be safe. There are, yeah, well, that is actually what we did mostly to overcome the barriers of the consequences of climate change events. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Priestess Beatrice. For your second question, how do you see the role of faith communities in implementing adaptation, and what unique value added do faith communities bring to this issue?
Well, like I said, we do everything ourselves and at the community level, and in our case, we use a lot the combination of local, traditional, indigenous, and Afro-descended knowledge in order to find a form of resilience to different range of climate events. What happens in where we are is that eventually the sea rises very, very strongly. For example, when along the Caribbean area, we have a lot of hurricanes right now. We have the season which started also, and depending with the climate change, it becomes even more. So what we have is the rising sea, very strong rains, more than normal, and rivers that overflow, you know. So what we do then, like I said, we apply a lot of indigenous and Afro-descended knowledge, which have been adapting to different climates throughout centuries, no? So that is sort of a normal thing to do. We also have to be very careful. Like, for example, here where I live, I always have to make sure that there are trees which cannot fall over the house, or certain parts of the tree need to be cut in order that they don't fall on the house. And mostly in the whole region, people are very careful. Foreigners who come, they don't know. And sometimes they leave the trees right there where they build houses, and then the accidents happen. So that is another issue, where how we construct our houses. For example, traditionally the houses are not flat on the floor, they are elevated. So that mostly we try to continue to do that, but always newcomers, they don't know, and they make flat houses. And then the issue of the trees, we cannot have dangerous trees around our houses. Yeah, that's the most common things we have to look for, yes.
Thank you so much, Priestess Beatrice. Those were the two questions, but if you have any concluding thoughts or any concluding messages, please feel free to do so.
Well, I think it's very important that in the cities, it's different, people get directions. I know in the capital here, people have directions in how to deal with such events. But for example, right now, our country has big floodings on the other side of Costa Rica, on the Pacific side, where international help is being brought in right as we speak now, in order to help all those people who are losing almost everything, house, and also the animals, if they raise animals, cows, and so. And even in the capital, we had floodings these days. And in this case, I guess the national institutions, they help out. But at the community level, it's very important that the people really take it very seriously, to organize themselves in order to take the best decisions in the location they are located. We have sort of an emergency community group, which is linked to an emergency group at the canton level, which is, canton is one, our province has different cantons, that's how we call it. I don't know how it's in other places. And the canton is rather big, has mountain and has the sea. So then at the community level, people organize themselves, and then we bring everything together at the canton level with the municipality, also to do larger emergency implementation plans. That's how we do it. And I don't know if everyone does it at the community level, but it's very important to do it these days, yeah. I think that is it, what I have to say for the moment, yes.
Beautiful. Well, I'm so grateful
Yeah.
that Priestess Beatrice was able to share her reflections with us. I think coming from this practitioner approach, it's really interesting to think as we finish her remarks that it's not just about what we're doing, but how it's being done, right? Are we ensuring that as we look to help support communities in their locally led adaptation, that we are honoring traditional Indigenous and Afro-descendant knowledge that comes from that local context to ensure that as we come in, we're not perpetuating harm, but rather we're really creating and replicating the best solutions that work on the ground. And I think faith communities in their best iterations can be some of those key like guardians of that knowledge and those who are able to really liaise with the community in a way that replicates that deep listening that Priestess Beatrice was speaking to. And so I'm happy to continue us on to our second part of our panel as we reflect on what we see the role of faith communities in implementing adaptation looking like. What are those unique value add-ons that we bring to this issue? So I'll pass it over to Stephanie to start us off.
Thank you. The Constitution of Vanuatu blends three main elements: traditional Melanesian value, Christian principle, and faith in God. Those elements are the center of our country's governance, development, and identity. So by recognizing the principle, the Christian principle and faith in God, we ensure that we provide the moral and ethical foundation to the people, the community. And while acknowledging the traditional Melanesian values supports the cultural integrity and community driven governance. So I want to go back again to talk about this youth-led community organization, community-based organization. They support and help youth in the community to build the moral leadership, the morals, so that they know and enhance the services to the community for the betterment and the well-being of the community. So based on the material that give them training to the youth, they base it on Rui Institute is a Baha'i, it's a Baha'i faith document, or I don't know if I say it wrong, sorry, but they based all the materials, they developed them based on this Baha'i teaching. And it helps the youth at the community level to better support or engage in adaptation projects in the community to support them. So one of the main things that the Learn to Serve Vanuatu has been doing is to contribute to the implementation of the national and international climate change policy and agenda. So I want to mention that Learn to Serve Vanuatu has been one of the recipient, the first recipient of the Loss and Damage Fund. So given by Loss and Damage Youth Coalition grant that helps them to continue the projects on water, livestock, and also forestry, sorry if I say it wrong. What's this? Agroforestry nursery to restore the ecosystem. So these are some of the adaptation projects that these youth are leading. So just wanted to say that when we go to church, we hear every time our pastor or priest say that we are the stewardship of our environment. We have to take care of our environment. And by doing so, it's like raising also our consciousness and saying that, okay, yes, I need to take care of this and that. Even though we have cyclones annually, you can see people at the community level still conserve and put an area aside to preserve and replant tree, replanting mangrove. These projects that youth are doing at the community level. It doesn't stop them like, oh no, there's cyclone and I can't do it anymore. Next year I have to do it again. But every time you go to church, and when you hear that, you know that you have a responsibility. And if you give that service to the community or your own household, then you feel good about it. We all need to develop those moral capabilities, and our faith organization and community play such an important role in the development of this capacity. So we are very happy. For me, I'm very happy to see that at the past COP and this COP, we can see more and more faith organization engaging in this space to provide and enhance the consciousness of everyone, and also for the parties and individually on the importance and the moral of spiritual capacity as the foundation of all materials, material developments. And yes, thank you.
I love that. Thank you, Stephanie. I think it's so interesting. Like, we're really asking the question here at COP oftentimes, how do we get people to care, right? And what, like, as you're lifting up, we're really utilizing our faith communities as a way to shape consciousness and to impart upon us the moral importance of our relationship to the natural world. It's not just there for us to extract, but rather we are stewards of it. And I think it's beautiful that you're also doing such tremendous work cultivating moral leadership with youth to ensure that our young generation has the resilience needed to face this uncertain future that is to come. And so continuing on this conversation of how the role of faith communities plays in implementing adaptation, I'll pass it over to Anjali.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, as we're saying, faith communities in their best iterations can apply the wisdom of tradition while staying rooted in their sacred knowledge of sustainable ways of living. And really by applying and adopting social justice principles and a human rights first perspective in messaging and organizing, actually practicing what they preach in terms of inclusivity and doing interfaith work. You know, it's about constantly asking yourself the question, how interfaith is it really? How inclusive is it really? How much are you giving vulnerable communities a seat at the table? And also, how much are you staying flexible and willing to learn? I appreciate faith communities speaking out about the denial of protections for historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities in the US. African Americans, Indigenous people, Latinx people, immigrants, low-income populations are much more susceptible to the negative impacts of climate change, and highlighting the disparity will mobilize people of all faiths to do better for each other. I especially appreciate Interfaith Power and Light DMV's initiatives that include the coalition we're part of with Sierra Club and Action in Montgomery and other organizations. It's called Beyond Gas, which is targeted to educating people about the harms of burning gas indoors, specifically by testing the emissions of hundreds of kitchens and congregational kitchens across the DMV region, and taking the methane emissions as well as the NO2 emissions, for which there are no indoor standards for what the safe levels are. There are currently just outdoor safe levels of 100 parts per billion, and we've documented plenty of homes and buildings that show readings of 4 to 8 times the safe level for outdoors. We also train volunteers for doing the kitchen testing, and we do induction cooking demos to show how easy and delicious gas-free cooking can be. On a local level, strengthening Maryland's energy efficiency program called Empower last year was a major win for dozens of faith communities in the DMV that got together, as well as passing the Warmth Act, which will enable more folks to get geothermal energy. Even approaching people and the culture of the US, which is not ready to phase out fossil fuels as it is right now, making sure people know that they have the option of opting out of the monopoly that is their local utility. They do have options, and that's really, I think, where IPL DMV and another Interfaith Power and Light affiliates and partners are helping people to understand you can make better decisions when you have better choices, and to have better choices, you have to know about them. So providing Energy efficiency assessments and energy audits is now mandated in many utilities, allowing people to have the option of signing up and subscribing for community solar programs. So even if their roof is not favorable for getting solar panels, understanding that they can source their energy otherwise on the same bill that they already pay. I want to give a shout out also to some of our partner organizations that have been taking the lead in helping congregations start with their own community in greening and adaptation. One is Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the US with more miles of coastline than California. And Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake helps congregations with stormwater drains, rainwater harvesting, a lot of native planting, educating about how impervious surfaces are not sustainable in the long run. Hindus for Human Rights, which is based around North America as well as the UK and India, that highlights the need to have conversation about caste-based discrimination and how that intersects with the different jobs people may have currently that are placing them in more vulnerable positions, and also speaking out against growing Islamophobia around the world, bridging the gap between people of all religions in the South Asian countries that many of us come from. And another thing faith communities can play a role in, at least Green Dharma, is emphasizing the role of ahimsa, of nonviolence, practicing the living notion that we are all connected. And by we, it's not just human beings, and it's not just human beings and animals, it's human beings, animals, the water, the earth, and at least recognizing the harms of war around the world, global conflict, in addition to just the military industrial complex in general. Militarism emissions account for 5.5% annually. And for comparison, for context, the entire continent of Africa emits about 5%. As I was saying earlier, the temples and gurdwaras and other congregations that serve as community hubs for people to stay connected with each other in the light of, predatory algorithms on our social media that are keeping us in information vacuums. It's so refreshing to connect with people face to face and soul to soul. Our faith communities are also holding our local government accountable by working with local agencies such as NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Interfaith Power and Light in North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland are those affiliates that make up the Eastern Seaboard. And we're currently working on a project with Creation Justice Ministries with grant funding from NOAA that starts with listening sessions, going into these communities, sitting down, shutting up, pulling out your pad of paper or your laptop, taking notes, listening to what people are actually going through, especially given the context of where people are living in more vulnerable areas of the coastline that are going to be the first to go, the first to be underwater. And yeah, upholding the Justice 40 environmental justice initiatives in all of the legislative policy reform that is suggested. Sometimes things sound really shiny and new, but making sure that it's actually just in its outcome will be really crucial for faith communities' continued involvement and change.
Thanks, Anjali. I think it was such a powerful list of actions that faith communities are taking from both Green Dharma and IPL. And I think that's so interesting to hear how you're finding gaps to which the community is suffering and saying that we cannot accept this suffering. We're going to step in and we're going to ensure that you can begin to adapt and then go back to our governments and then advocate for the policy changes that are needed to create that systemic shift. I think that's such a beautiful formula to which faith groups are really stepping in to ensure that as we meet with communities, we hear where they're suffering and we begin to co-create those solutions with them. And so now I'll go ahead and pass it over to Radu to continue us on this conversation of where that vital role for faith communities lies in adaptation.
Thank you. And As we discussed earlier, there are barriers, yes, but we have as well neighbors everywhere, including religious and spiritual leaders. They have voice more than us. I might have voice here at COP, but at local level, priests, pastors, they have more voice. And it was personally to me, because I was raised by a pastor. He has more voice than me with local communities. And we sometimes forget that faith-based organization, churches, can be enablers for adaptation to climate change. And CRS work in Madagascar, but probably globally, we are relying on those. And might be a good example that last year, I was harassed by a priest because he wanted to know better about climate change. He really, really wanted to know. So at the end, we brought him to COP28 in Dubai. He was happy, but it wasn't the outcome we wanted from him. And it was not what he wanted. He just wanted to go to COP. He wanted to bring something to Madagascar from COP. And the first day we were at Madagascar, he told me, I need money. I need a lot, because I'm going to implement green school in my parish. And he was able to do that within 1 month. So they have the voice, they have the power to bring communities to adopt new techniques. And that priest, throughout the year, he was harassing me and my team to help him develop strategies at community level, how he can teach the kids on adaptation to climate change. And he wanted to know all aspects of climate change. They might not know as spiritual leader what needs to be done, but as faith-based organization, we have the capacity to support the churches at local level to support in adaptation to climate change. And in Madagascar in particular, Catholic Church, but all over church, they have school everywhere. And people wanted to go to faith-based school because it's better education, better than public education. And what we did is we developed materials for schools to teach the kids, because we might negotiate today, but what we're negotiating today is for the future. And those kids, they can be the voice as well at local level. And as faith-based organization, we have to work towards that. The other thing, and in Madagascar, the Catholic Church has a lot of land, yes, that are unused. What we're doing is that we're using those church lands, working together parish to use those as field school, so that it can be used by local communities to learn how new techniques to adapt to climate change. And as faith-based organization, we sometimes forget that we have a role with the church as well. And we might be unfaithed people, but we can use the voice of those that reach the local communities to ensure that whatever we negotiate here, whatever we learn from here, and that's exactly what Priest Larizon did last year. As soon as he get back to Madagascar, he harassed a lot of people. And I'm using the word harass because it was the case, but he wanted really his parish, but the Catholic Church in Madagascar, to go into care for creation. And I think that's really important to understand that even if we sometimes forgot the church as part of climate advocacy, people, we should rely on them. And we have to rely on them because they have better and more voice than us at local community.
Thanks, Radu. I think how we transmit that knowledge and transmitting it through the church and faith communities is a really powerful ask. And I think as we continue to scale the work that we're doing on adaptation, more of it's needed to ask that question of who really has the power to inspire the community to change, right? So I'll pass it over to Alex for our final reflections on that role in faith communities in implementing adaptation.
Thanks so much. And just reacting to kind of everything that's been said in the last hour, I think the role of faith actors really is in breaking down the barriers that we have been discussing. And I think that that's what all of these reflections have kind of gotten to, like even just commenting on, you know, the conversation raised about kind of technical assistance and capacity, and what, the program that was mentioned from NOAA, one of our federal agencies, where it starts with a listening session. That type of kind of engagement is absolutely critical to building technical assistance and capacity and data sharing. And whether it's learning programs, whether it's technical products, it should be done hand in hand with these listening sessions, with actual kind of integration with the community, and not just handing something over, right? But actually like a conversation that happens back and forth. Or when we think about kind of the engagement with local governments, I found that to be a really interesting point, because I think faith actors are critical there as well, in making sure that from, every kind of aspect that goes into an adaptation project, whether it's a local government, whether it's the people that are supposed to be directly benefiting, whether it's the national government, whether it's an international partner that's helping to provide assistance. I think, just as you mentioned, the faith actors can be like the central focal point for sometimes transmitting that knowledge to the actual people at an individual level. And even just reacting to what Priestess Beatrice said on sea level rise, that made me reflect on the entire space that comes up around cultural heritage, whether it's in adaptation or loss and damage, and the conversations that need to be had with community members on the impacts to their well-being, whether physical or mental, and making sure that that's taken into consideration. And my experience has been that faith actors are sometimes the most trusted kind of members of a community that international partners, domestic partners can work with. And that's a really critical partnership in actually implementing this work. And I'll just close by saying, adaptation isn't easy, and it's always evolving. And I think always staying in conversations with all of these different people is central to making sure that that is how we actually do center these voices in the work that we do. And I'm just, from my perspective, I'm very appreciative of all of the work that you all are doing to make sure that that really does happen. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Alex. I'll parrot one of your phrases, that adaptation isn't easy, and conversation really is the key, right? So now we go into conversation with everyone in the audience. It's Q&A time. We've had some time to reflect with you all on our perspectives, some of our solutions, our barriers. What's been missed? What are you thinking about? What's rising to the surface as you're reflecting with us together? We'd love to hear what you have for our panel. Yes, please. And we'll take like one or two questions in totality, and then we'll pass it back to the panel and then go that way.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Muhammad Anwar Hussain from Islamic Relief Bangladesh. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. We know about 84% people of the world are believers. This is our strength. We believe that we have one creator. He has created us and given us the custodianship of this globe. And we are here to establish justice. Justice for me, justice for the nature, and justice for the all creature. So if we believe it and we practice it accordingly, our religion teaches us not to exploit, not to spoil, not to waste, not to be extravagant. Now we are facing crisis, the global warming. What's the reason behind? We have did injustice to our globes. Now we are suffering. We came here to demand the money. We came here to demand the compensation. But we need to think ourselves. We need to change ourselves, our practice, and our regular life. We need to change. And we have the opportunity to. mobilize the resources to the most vulnerable peoples. We need not to ask another people to compensate, because our religions, our teaches us to help the poor people, to sacrifice for the poor people, to sacrifice the most vulnerable people. We can collect our charity, we can collect the resource and mobilize to the right people to directly, not many attires through bureaucracy. We know when the fund will be allocated to the government, the climate fund, it will pass through many tiers, and the marginal people, most vulnerable people, gets only 2%. 2 to 10% only goes to the people. But we believers and we the faith-based organization, we ensure all time, we ensure the justice and accountability. And we are custodian to reach the people. So we have the power. If we work together, no problem we see. As Islamic Relief Bangladesh, we are working for the poor people. We are mobilizing the resources and increasing the capacity of the poor people to identify their adaptation need and to prioritize their adaptation need. Then they are being mobilized to a group, self-help group, and they are mobilizing their fund own arrangement. And they are using this fund without revolving, without any interest, as our religion, as our we believes. No interest and flexible time. In this way, they are coming out from their vulnerability and moving towards the resilience. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your reflections, especially as we think about the systemic transformation we need, but also the individual transformation that's needed. I have a hand over here and a hand over here as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for your insights. My name is Christian. I'm based at the London School of Economics, where we do research on how to bring faith communities into policy discussions. And my question is to Alex, as someone who's sitting on the policy end of the table, how, from your perspective, can faith communities engage productively and meaningfully with policymakers? What messages resonate with your own office, other offices? And I would open this up to the rest of the panel as well if there's experiences, but I'm interested in your perspective from the policymaking side. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. We'll take the second question and then we'll bring it back to the panel. Yeah. Did I have another hand? Yes.
Hi, Linnea Bain from the Episcopal Church. I am struck, I'm amused, I am inspired by, I'm sure most of us are, by Princess Beatrice, who I think has gotten to some of the heart of the question here, which is, do we need less common sense, CENTS, that we have been talking about incessantly, creating acronyms for? Do we need more common sense, SENSE? And I think Priestess Beatrice shows us the way in responding to adaptation without any money at all. And yet here we are trying to raise trillions and going through all these negotiations and expense to try to do this. So my question for the panelists is, what can we draw upon from her wisdom? And also, and I'm not saying that her situation is ideal, obviously we all need financing, but what can we draw from her very real, very practical response, full of integrity and authenticity to her and her community? What lessons of wisdom can we draw upon in thinking about climate finance?
Beautiful, thanks, Linnea. And so we have for the panel these two questions. Happy to pass it first to Alex to start us as we reflect on both, and then we can pass it down the panel to continue.
Thanks so much, and I'll try to be brief and maybe try to answer both very quickly. On the first question, I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it. I think the answer to that depends on which kind of policy level you're also talking about, whether it's, local government. In the US, just for an example, we obviously have state government, we have federal government, and then you also have engagement in these international spaces, which is a totally, I think, different set of engagements. I think in my experience, oftentimes the conversations have been policy teams meeting with the actual kind of faith leaders and talking to them and understanding what they're hearing and maintaining an open dialogue in the way that we do with a wide variety of kind of stakeholders and folks who are interested. And I actually think I would turn it to my colleagues on the stage in terms of asking them what we could do better, right, in terms of a partnership here overall. And then on the second question, I, again, will turn it to my colleagues who will probably have much smarter things to say than me. But one reflection to your point is that as we think about these broad ecosystems of players that operate in the adaptation and the finance and the resilience spaces, one thing I'm always struck by is, including in the conversation a question of how are we making sure that all the various players are talking to each other in a way that actually makes sure we're not duplicating efforts or creating redundancies in a way that makes a system actually efficient. So as you think about, the broad ecosystem at every level, is it not just, how much or what quality, but also is it efficient? And so that's something that I've been reflecting on recently, to your point. So I'll turn it over. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks, Alex. I'll pass it over to Stephanie, the two questions, and then also Alex's question to us of are there things that we can be doing better, and then also closing thoughts from your side.
Thank you. I think I might just, I won't answer the first question directly, but just giving my perspective and how we see the work's been done in Vanuatu. Usually the government always consult with the community, the CSOs, NGOs, INGO, faith-based organizations, sitting at the same table, at the same level, and trying to understand and bring in some good reflections, and also taking in some good approach and strategy that the government is giving, and also from the civil society perspective. And this is why I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization, but I have the party badge, and I also support my government at the negotiating table for loss and damage. So this is how we talk with our government and see this good collaboration. We don't go against, even if we're civil society, we don't go against, but we complement what the government is doing. Where it has the government put it at some level, we can take it to another level. So this is how we help us out, each other. So that I can answer for the first question. For the second question, I would like to share some good stories from at the community level with the Learn to Serve Vanuatu. We have applied for a fund. That's just a story, an example. We have applied for funding, and then that funding came for the youth to work on an innovative project, an adaptation project. And we can see that every time we ask them, can you submit your planning and your budget so that we can release the funding and then see where you can, and they're like, oh, the mothers are cooking for us. And oh, my father used our transport to go and collect the sand and come, and oh, the people at the community are building our learning center. And we just hear and say, oh, okay, so we wrote for that funding, and it's just sitting there, and you can see the youth are taking the ownership. And because they went through this moral leadership teaching or training, they understand that, okay, it's my role to do that. If I do it, then it's for the ones that are coming after, and it's good. And we don't need the money. We need the money just to, I don't know, to pay gas or fuel or things like that. But for the actual activity and actually moving, advancing the work at the local level, we can see that, okay, they're doing just fine. And it's just reporting. And one of the good case that we also shared this learning with the donor is that we use the other funding half of the remaining of the funding to do another project as well in the community. So not just one, but two. So you can see how this, giving service, that when we teach them, we give them good principles and guidance and moral leadership and faith. We include all of this in the development of an individual. You can see that they take ownership in everything in the community. And yeah, thank you.
I love that. And thinking about how we unlock these hidden resources simply by inspiring and educating this model of leadership. Pass it over to Radu to continue. And also note, I thought we ended at 6. We end at 6:15, so we don't need concluding remarks yet. We pass it to Radu.
Yes, for the first question, I think those two questions are linked. I'm here at COP not just to be in this panel, I'm as well the advisor for the Malagasy delegation for the negotiation. And I'm part of that team because they want as well the front line, the voice from the community. And they choose CRS for that because we have the voice of the most vulnerable ones. And the Malagasy delegation wanted to have us in that advisory for the negotiation because they might not know what is happening in the field, exactly what's happening at local community, and they wanted us, and they choose CRS, or faith-based organization in this case, to be part of their advisor. I do believe that because of we can change, or we can at least lead the change based on the result we are doing. And we do believe in Madagascar that because of the work we're doing, at community level, they choose us to be part of the negotiation team. And that's really important because most of the time, high-level political, they know as less as general public knows. But those that are in the field every day, my colleagues, that are in the field every day at remote communities, they know exactly what they're facing. And our voice is heard because we are working within the local communities. And I was as well impressed by Princess Beatrice, what she's doing, because she's doing a lot with a lot less than us. And I do believe that we have to learn from her and from her experience, and for those people that devoted their life for local communities, and that's important. And we might be here sitting in this really nice place, but at the end, what we're doing here is for them. And to respond to your question, the most important thing is not to be at COP, is to bring something important from COP for those local communities.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Radu. I think devotion to community, like it's really what we're here for. Anjali, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. The answers to those questions are definitely linked. Something I didn't talk about earlier in the barriers is that a lot of nonprofits operating under 501c3 status are limited in their advocacy, what portion of their entire time and resources they can spend on advocacy as compared to a 501c4 arm of organizations. And of course, there are different tax laws, but addressing that campaign finance is not being reformed is one of the main reasons why we have not adopted a full renewable energy portfolio. And constantly challenging the notion that we're not obliged to help each other out. We're not obliged to consider each other's needs. The resistance to adopting a self-reliant, pull yourself up from the bootstraps and deal with it mentality. Preserving freedoms of speech and freedoms of organizing, and enforcing those altruistic ideals that there doesn't have to be something immediately in it for us. It's a matter of preserving the world for each other and for a better future for the next generation and even now. It's important to address the lack of environmental protections that are designed to be long-lasting. There are plenty of wins, at least in the US and around the world, in climate finance negotiations and even in domestic clean energy policy, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. But if they aren't, and mind you, that's a ball that's rolling down the mountain and gathering up traction, that those investments are not going to end immediately, regardless of who's in Washington. And at the same time, it's important to pay attention to the issues that are peripheral to what we're immediately organizing on, such as being the only large developed country that has implemented a comprehensive carbon pricing mechanism to hold fossil fuel polluters accountable. Welcoming offshore wind and knowing the benefits of renewable energy through new sources. So in the face of legislative and political uncertainty, it's easy to lose faith, but continuing to pay attention to like the winnable fights, the solutions that will lead to tangible outcomes, fruitful for people that are suffering, I think is really important. And you know, about common sense versus common sense, I love that. And you know, we're the richest nation in the world. Technically, we have plenty of money. It's not the issue that we don't have money. It's how it's being spent, what is being invested in that doesn't actually represent the needs of the majority of the population and the interests of the majority of voters. We know that our non-renewable resources will run out, and that adaptation requires innovation, and it takes time to scale those solutions up. But at the same time, it's important to keep, rooted in knowing that scarcity is a taught evil. We have enough. We need to share it.
I love this narrative of like manufactured scarcity and how we need to really be operating from this abundance mindset so that we can unlock what already is there. If I can have a moment to take off my moderator hat and put on my organizational hat, I think I want to speak to this question because it's so exciting, right? Like, how do we unlock what already is there? And I think Priestess Beatrice's examples is really inspiring in that it speaks to how we're able to really support community through inspiring love, right? It's not that we don't have enough money to be able to create the work that needs to be done. It's, do we love and care for each other and care for each other's well-being enough that we're willing to forsake a little bit of our creature comforts, or maybe cut a little bit of our own portion of well-being to be able to support our neighbors, right? So my organization, Buddhist Siji Foundation, we were founded on that principle of like really grassroots donors, right? So our organization was founded by 30 housewives, and they each got a little bamboo bank that they put 1 cent of their grocery money into. And it was this narrative that like, it's not a lot of money, but you're putting in daily love. And through that love, we're able to create collective impact for our community, wherever that community's needs were. Right? And so by accumulating these 30 housewives, they then went forward and said, I live in poverty, but I am able to do good too, right? And through that, inspiring this whole collective wave of people who were like, well, I can give 1 penny too, I can give 1 penny too, but it's not about giving like 30 cents at the end of the month, but this daily accumulation of the act of love, right? And I think that story and that example of how Tsuji got started is a similar narrative that we see throughout our faith communities, right? That we don't act for like this accumulation of financial or material resources, but we're accumulating love and that connection to community, and the recognition that no matter who we are, we have that ability to create that influence. And maybe to speak to Alex's question of like, what can like the US delegation do better? What can countries do better? I think that even asking that question is a beautiful step in the right direction, right? Because these systems that are created, they're pretty like solid, right? They're static in the way that we do our work. We have ways of being. But to say that these ways of being will deliver the results that we want maybe is inadequate, right? We've had 29 COPs so far, but we are still so far from really eradicating climate change as an overarching illness for humanity. And so something in our process needs to change. Our willingness to ask the question of how we can change, I think, is the beginning piece, right? And from that, but from that beginning piece, I think comes the next part, which is how honest are we willing to be with each other, right? Publicly, sometimes it's a little difficult. So where are those spaces that we can design, whether in the lead up to or after, that we're able to be in that sort of honest reflection with each other so that we can design better systems of how we cooperate, collaborate, and support each other in public and private. Okay, moderator hat back on. We have 5 more minutes left. Are there any burning questions in the audience that we have not addressed yet? If not, I'd love it to turn it back to the panel, maybe for final closing remarks, if you will permit me. Yes? Okay, let's start with Stephanie. We'll go to Alex, Radu, and then Anjali. Stephanie, closing remarks.
My closing remarks will be more of a call to the youth. Your voice, your courage, and your actions are very essential for the future, for the resilient future. So equip yourself with intellectual knowledge, spiritual knowledge to better support your community and your nation and the world. Thank you.
Beautiful. Alex, over to you.
I guess the only thing I'll add to this already incredible conversation is just, looking forward. I think when we talk about adaptation and when we talk about resilience, it's kind of sometimes everything, right? There's nothing you can't really talk about in the context of adaptation sometimes. And so just as the conversation continues to evolve and we learn how to better equip and use the tools that are at our disposal and to be creative in how we think about what we have at our disposal, just really appreciate these continued opportunities to come together and reflect, as you just mentioned, and to always be assessing how do we keep moving in the direction that we are actually using the tools that we have to serve the most vulnerable. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks, Alex. Radu.
Maybe my final words. We are all enablers, but we have to work together. And let's bring something concrete from this COP. It's not just a matter of being at COP. It's bringing concrete solutions, adaptation for the local communities based on what you have seen at COP. Thank you.
Thanks, Radu. Anjali.
Yeah, I think this is my first COP 29, and I am so thankful to be here, be alongside of this panel of esteemed faith leaders from around the world. I hope this is the first of many good conversations about what locally led adaptation looks like from around the world and what unique challenges we're each facing that we can learn from each other and take home the wisdom to our respective homes. In the present time of uncertainty, what kind of challenges can threaten the amazing progress that we're making as a nation and as a world in the fight against climate change. I'm channeling the fierce energy of protective deities in their various iterations, from goddess Durga, whose many arms hold weapons to defeat forces of evil, and Kali, the goddess of time, death, and destruction, reminding us that it's okay to enter a new era, a time where we are leaving behind old practices that are no longer serving the greater good. And I love this imagery from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, verse 10. One who performs their duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme God, is not affected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So it's, about how the lotus flower is born from mud, yet it rises above the water and blossoms towards the sun, thus retaining its beautiful purity. Lotus leaves are waterproof. Liquid poured on them doesn't soak through, but runs off. Although the lotus owed its birth, growth, and sustenance to the water, the leaf doesn't permit itself to be wetted. And it just reminds me constantly that, with the doom and the gloom that we're constantly faced with, it's important to stay resilient as communities and take care of each other. And, the various forms of work that we bring to this movement towards climate justice in Maryland, DC, and around the world, there are many opportunities for messiness in the decision-making processes. So may we remain untouched by the elements that could weigh us down as we perform this work in divine consciousness.
Thanks, Anjali. I think in closing, I'll just say we're really grateful for all of our panelists, for your deep listening as the audience, for our conversation. Adaptation is a journey. We're here as community to do the work together, and it's a work rooted in love. We find ourselves in the mud here, but let's work to create that lotus together. Thank you guys so much.